logs in on my behalf, scrapes my details off a website almost metaphorically, and then puts them in somewhere else. And banks have been complaining for some time that that wasn't particularly secure. And I believe that there are a number of quite large fintech companies that already do this, to the likes of Yodlee and Mint.com, who kind of said, well, actually, no, we'd like to keep that screen scraping stuff. And it looks like the EBA who've come out and said, nope, no screen scraping, we want APIs, we want direct, controlled access into that data. Any thoughts on what's going on with this one, Sarah?
I'm sorry, they can see the faces I pull now, I'm just slightly disconcerted. I've been told I have a very expressive face. So this battle has been going on a very long time. This is not new to PSD2, this screen scraping, API, whichever way you want to look at it. Also, there are some banks out there that use screen scraping, and there are some apps run by banks which use screen scraping, some aggregation apps. So it's not just banks versus fintechs, it's everybody
uses it. It's more
complicated,
isn't it? Yeah.
It is a complicated issue, and I kind of think there are pros and cons on both sides. I think the biggest problem here is consumer confusion. So everybody keeps going on about PSD2 is going to be brilliant and everybody's going to have access to their data and it's all going to be wonderful and we're going to save loads of money and switch our energy providers. But the biggest problem with all of this is that the average consumer has no idea where their data is or what is being done with it. And there's a lot of kind of, when you actually explain it to consumers, and YouGov's done a survey, this is what open banking is, this is what it requires. 90% of consumers go, I'm not doing that, I'm not giving you my data. Now the fact that their data is probably already out there on Facebook and YouTube and wherever else it might be.
That's not the point, is it?
No, but my point is that I can see why the EBA has done it, because if you're going to go out there and say you have to use a secure channel to access your data, screen scraping is arguably less secure and it's less easy to put standards on, and that message is just going to confuse consumers. So if you're going to go out there and say, it's all right to hand your online banking details to these guys, but we're Barclays and we put a huge billboard up that says don't hand your password over to your mum, consumers are going to be like, what, sorry, what, where are we going? So I can see why they've taken it down that route. That's one perspective on it. There are obviously many other reasons why the EBA, the European Banking Association, may have done it this way.
And the Banking Association,
yes.
Yeah. I think there's a few different bits on this, isn't there? Like, you know, PSD2 doesn't give you everything, right? It gives you transactional data for current accounts. It doesn't give you the ability to aggregate everything into a single source.
They haven't even specified APIs yet. We're
That's
still
very
back
true.
there at kind of like a standard interface, which could be anything. I mean,
Theoretically.
Which is where the confusion comes from, right? It's a standard interface, and so I'm going to give somebody access to the transactions in my bank account via a standard interface. People assume that means these wonderful APIs that could be magic, could be magic beans for all the, because they just haven't been defined. I mean, do you have a view on this internationally?
I think they all but say it, though, right?
Yeah.
I think they do all but say it in the document.
They're just hedging. They don't want to put the API in the paper.
Back when the paper was written, it wasn't a cool little acronym, and people weren't going out. But I think the thing about this, though, is that it's sort of no shit. These guys are trying to stop this type of stuff happening, because actually, in terms of the ability to share the username and passwords, banks have been prohibiting this within the terms and conditions of internet banking for forever.
But some of them are still doing it, which is what confuses me there on that aspect. There's a hypocritical aspect on the bank side as well.
Is it like do as I say, not as I do in this instance then, to a certain degree?
I suspect the high street banks have that attitude on a
Many
number of
fronts.
things. Sorry, Chloe.
No, I would just add in that using the word screen scraping is just going to terrify anyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really. And your consumer points there are such a good point. I mean, it's like scaremongering is all that I would add. Certainly from an Australian perspective, PSD2 pretty much still open to interpretation. I don't know how many people actually know really the ins and outs of it. That's being really honest, and we're certainly getting that perception. So,
well, I actually ran a workshop with a group of bank executives very, very recently, and actually asked them to put their hand up who had actually read the entirety of the document. And there was only one person who had actually read the entirety of that document in that executive team, when all of them are going to be massively impacted by actually everything that's in it. So that, to your point, Chloe, I don't think many people really do. It's the
in the industry, let alone the consumer side.
Yeah, exactly.
There was actually a really funny graph that was put out this week. I saw a bunch of people sort of getting really excited about on Twitter. That was the amount of people that say APIs are going to be transformation in our industry, as opposed to the zero that actually know what APIs actually stand for, which is, you know, it kind of feels like blockchain over and over and over again. Really.
So I used to have a slide where I had API and I had like a playful ibex. Adventure precedes invention. Like there's, yeah, no,
wow.
there was some really fun ones on that slide. Because application programming interface doesn't really tell you what it does, but then you describe end-to-end customer journeys, the ability for I want to go buy a mortgage, and there's a platform that can get house prices in, that can also compare quotes from solicitors, that can also give me the price for a mortgage and can package all of that up. That sounds like something customers want. That is the promise. But actually what we're doing is we're getting lost in the weeds of what do different agendas want and how do they want to achieve it. And I don't think there's a really good technical voice, because when Google or Facebook or Netflix or any tech company releases an API, one, they're already technically savvy, and two, they know precisely how their customers are going to use it. When a regulator says, I'm going to enforce open banking on you, they have no idea, and they can't really have an idea of how customers might use it, because that's up to the industry, and the industry probably has other concerns right now.
Well, I know we're going to go really long on this one, but a big part of me here is that banks want to shut down screen scraping because it allows the sort of disintermediation that we've sort of seen the potential with when there's actual real-time data going through from an API perspective. So shutting down screen scraping and then massively watering down what PSD2 actually is just feels like an obvious play to kind of actually try and almost like
get out of it.
Yeah, just like retain the status quo, you know.
I mean, there is the. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get onto it at some point today, but there is the open banking standards which just came out yesterday, which I haven't tried to read. I haven't even had time to look at them yet, so I'm sure somebody in this room has.
Yeah, hopefully they're a good start.
So you know, there is. Depends where you are, because that's obviously British only. You know, only applies to the UK, but it's no surprise that banks are going to try and shut down competition. That surprises nobody, really.
Yeah, that surprises no. It was interesting. We had James Whittle from the UK Payments Association come over to Australia and present to the banks on this PSD2 last year, and you could certainly feel the nervousness in the room, because our market is so similar to this market as far as sort of size, scale, number of majors. So I think they're all quite nervous.
And the view we hear from a lot of our US colleagues and friends is the US banks are very much of the opinion that they'd like that open banking stuff to stay in Europe. Thank you very much.
Yeah, except they're taking the bits they like. So if you look at some of the big US banks, the Wells Fargo's and the JP Morgans of this world, they've seen what Intuit's been doing for years, which is screen scraping a lot of it, and gone, you know, as Intuit, who run QuickBooks but also Mint, and gone, oh, you know what? There's a cross-selling opportunity there. We'll let them in, but on our terms, with our technology, and you know that works for both those parties and potentially those consumers.
I'm not entirely sure that's a negative.
No, but sorry, my point is that they're taking the bits of open banking that they like, and they're using it to benefit a number of people, which is a different way of doing it. So maybe the argument is you should let it evolve organically rather than forcing it on with rules and saying you can do this, you can't do that.
Innovation by regulation is interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun one when you're like, I'm cool with this if I'm doing it to somebody else, but not if they're doing it to me. That just seems weird to me. But there's another open banking story next up, actually.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for moving us swiftly on, David, because we could go forever on this. Which, by the way, it's Atom Bank, their CEO, has joined the Open Banking Initiative in the UK as the Challenger Bank representative. David, since you brought it up,
what does that mean?
What?
Yeah.
I sort of got lost on this one a little bit earlier on, if I'm honest with you. So I kind of went down every paragraph in this, made me sort of Google another thing and sort of try it on, if I'm honest with you. Firstly, the trustee of IE is Imran from EY, who received an OBE very recently.
So the trustee of IE received an OBE.
Yeah. I got through that.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like...
So IE is the Open Banking Implementation Entity. So this guy's in charge of that in terms of, I guess, the appointments and the sort of structure of it. Imran got an OBE for services in financial services recently, which, for the life of me, I cannot understand the context of or...
Was it financial services or was it services to FinTech?
Again, that makes it even weirder. Like, surely there are about 100 people that have started really big companies in the UK that are massively doing that, not some guy who's running a FinTech practice for a consultancy. That just seems really, really weird to me. But anyway, rabbit sort of hole number one that I went down on this one. The second one is that Mark Mullen, the CEO of Atom Bank, when, you know, nothing against Atom Bank, but have been appointed as the representative on the open banking implementation entity. Got through that again, well done. For challenger banks.
But how do they? Right, I have many questions on this. Which
Okay,
is,
yeah.
right, I'm hoping you're going to answer because you've done all the googling. One, how do they define a challenger bank? Have we got Santander in there with Monzo? Because presumably they're going to have different perspectives
I
on
don't
this.
think so. I don't think Santander are in that one.
It's probably like was founded in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, like
So Metro Bank? No, that's older than that.
Yeah.
I'm just TSB technically a
Technically,
challenger.
yeah.
Technically.
Like, see, like this is
Yeah.
very confusing to me. And secondly, my understanding of the UK open banking thing is that the 9 big banks who were pushed into this by the CMA, and as far as I understand, they were basically told they had to do it, have to do it, and have to create these standards and have to abide by them. Everybody else is kind of like, yeah, I might do that, might do something else. Like, you know, they have to opt into it.
Thanks for your invites to the meetings, but
Yeah, we have something else to do. So what is he going to do? Like,
I guess he's going to be sort of pulling together the thoughts of challenger banks and actually representing that into the other banks.
so he has to go to all his
stating the demands.
competitors and ask them what it is they want and how they plan to use APIs, and then tell everybody else.
Theoretically, yeah.
I think he's a good person for that, Mark Mullen. Yeah, I think he is. We've interviewed him. I've spent sort of quite a bit of time with him. He's had some really interesting sort of comments along the way. He's 26 years in original banking and then now challenger. Good point. What does that make? I actually agree with Simon. I think it's probably in the last 5 years. I read a quote today when I was sort of researching this one that he said to us, which is, the traditional banks fund a huge and obsolete infrastructure which was built 20 to 30 years ago. Like, he doesn't pull any punches, right? Another one, which I thought was quite funny, is banking is like going to the dentist. If you want to be painless, fast, and inexpensive, as in that's what you want out of it. So he's someone who gets up, he speaks, he's not afraid to say anything. So I think that's probably why it's particularly him, as opposed to maybe some of the CEOs of the other challengers.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with him being it. I just have a problem with them appointing one representative for all challenger banks. It's not that it's Mark Mullen. I think he's a great guy, and I completely agree with you. He has some excellent ideas, and he's done some wonderful things for banking in this country. But the fact that there should be one person who
But he's going to represent all of them,
Yeah.
right? I do think he is going to gather all of their thoughts together. That would be why he would be appointed.
So, but why do
Otherwise,
they get
have
one
all of them?
and the other 9 get individual
Oh,
voices?
good point. Okay.
So why do
I see your
RBS
point.
and Barclays and etc. get their own voice, and all the challengers have
in one little pile?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I think that's an
true.
interesting question. I think it was the nature of the governance and the way it's been set out. They wanted a person to coordinate lots, potentially, how many fintechs are there versus how many banks are there, because in open banking, it's not just for challenger banks. Potentially, you're also representing the interests of an entire industry. So therefore, to channel that through one voice was seen, I think, I don't know, as something that was potentially a useful conduit.
Did other people put themselves forward for it, or he was approached? Do we know?
I believe there were several of the people that were asked, but I don't
Okay.
know. I don't think there was a process that was followed.
How the decision was? Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know how it was come through.
I think I'm not sure Atom is necessarily representative of challenger banks. I think that's probably the thing that I
Yeah.
feel most sort of
Certainly
repulsed by this.
not on the consumer current account side. We talked about this previously. They said they're not doing that until early 2018. So if a lot of this is to do with the use of your current accounts, making payments through third parties, data aggregation for spending, they don't do that right now.
Yeah, so it's quite vague. So I guess again, as the more appointments are actually made on this one, and I guess the sort of clarity around what it actually is comes forward, then we'll start to see a little bit more.
Indeed. But moving us on, Sarah, there's a story here in FinExtra about HSBC hiring Diana Biggs to lead business model innovation. Have you read this story?
I have read the story. I have to say I don't know Diana Biggs, so I have no comment on her abilities as a person to take on this role. I have questions about the creation of such a role within a bank. I think it's so I think that business model innovation is something that banks as a whole should be looking at. And if this lady is going to have the remit to push that into every area of HSBC, then that is great. That's really good. Business models really, that's how banking gets reformed. You start with business models and then you do a fancy app on the front. Like,
Couldn't agree more.
so the point, the perspective, the idea is great. I am always cautious of anybody. There was another story this week about Santander appointing a chief digital and innovation officer. That always makes me kind of cringe a little bit, because I want, and I'm sure most banks want, I want everybody to be innovative and digital, and I want everybody to be rethinking business models. Now, if you can drive that from the top, which it looks like the lady who's come into Santander has done elsewhere, looks like she's done it from the top at Intuit, then that's great. But that is really hard. And it speaks to me, it reminds me or suggests to me of quite a legacy mindset. So we have a silo, and this is our innovation silo, and this is our retail silo, and this is our corporate silo, and this is our treasury silo. And if you can't get across those silos, then there's not much point to the appointment. I don't know her remit, and I don't know.
I always sort of think on this on a particularly like you say with innovation or even like digital strategy to a certain degree. This is almost a big indicator that this is the beginning. These guys are kind of like the canaries in the mine to a certain degree. You know, we expect them not to change everything that they need to, but actually this is the beginning of the transformation within big organisations like this to actually make it happen. So in 2 years' time, when this doesn't quite work out, but you know, there's 10 other people who are thinking about this, or it becomes everybody's remit to make it happen, kind of similar to sort of digital innovation in like 7 years ago, then I can kind of see that.
You've got to start somewhere.
At least it's just the beginning.
I think Sarah's point's an interesting one though. I've seen it work the other way around, where having a head of innovation, chief innovation officer, just creates a turf war. Because can you really own innovation? Can you really own business model innovation? But I know Diana quite well. She used to work for Oliver Wyman. She set up microfinance institutions across Africa. She's a strong career track record of having gotten things done in very hard places to get them done. And Lord knows HSBC could be the hardest of all of those places. But it really comes to humility, and that you don't own it, but you are the champion of it. And
you have to inculate it. You have to get it into all the little nooks and crannies and get everybody to start thinking about it.
And I think DBS did this well. DBS in Singapore have been really good at their chief innovation officer, Neil Cross, doesn't own innovation. He simply tries to inspire others to really work with it. And I think that's why they've been quite effective.
And he did that in partnership with Olivia Crispin, who's now gone over to CIMB and doing the same. I think this is a really interesting story, and because RFI Group works so closely with the banks, there's a chief digital transformation officer at sort of every bank. But I do think if it goes across the streams, I get what you're saying about the silos, but I think, you know, it has to come from the top. Something interesting here at Money 2020 in Copenhagen last week, I interviewed Josh Bottomley, who's the chief digital officer at HSBC, and he's ex-Google. I mean, this really interesting conversation about going from Google into a bank. So interesting to see HSBC, as you say, David, of all of the banks doing this kind of thing. I think they will follow suit. But as you say, it has to go across the entire bank, and you have to get your internal stakeholders on board. Digital transformation, they often talk about, you have to have that innovation side, but if it's not integrated with the CTO, like the technology side, tech side, it's just not going to work.
It just ends in turf wars, I've seen it go horribly wrong, but I've also seen, you know, there are examples where it's really worked.
I think HSBC have been very slow off the mark as well. I don't think, you know, even if you look at their mobile banking apps, I think they've been relatively sort of slow on this. So maybe this is kind of the kick they need.
A signal of them getting it,
Yeah, getting their head around it. And the fact, what's interesting to me is that she is business model innovation as opposed to digital officer, which is a really interesting title to me, and it suggests that they might have finally light bulb moment.
And knowing Diana, I wonder if that was her suggestion.
Can you influence business model innovation without owning the P&L?
Very good question. Well, can you influence it without? I mean, this is the Galoboshkovich argument. Can you influence business model innovation without changing how you architect, how people are incentivized, and how you record and account internally?
I knew Gela would have said that better than I ever could have said that.
Annoyingly, she is brilliant, isn't she? But I got to move us on. David, there's a story here in which is Bloomberg. Tesco Bank says Chief Executive Higgins to retire next year.
Yeah, this was, I guess it's a bit of a sort of a changing of the guard moment to a certain degree. So this is Benny Higgins, who's been in role for 10 years now, established Tesco Bank, former sort of RBS employee, and you know, really has kind of created that whole sort of culture and company is sort of set to depart. So I actually think it's quite a sad one, to be honest with you, because actually if you kind of look at all of the CEOs across the UK, he's probably the one with the absolute most character, which, you know, I think is a kind of a trait that you know, we probably should be instilling a little bit more in many of the other CEOs as well.
There's definitely a bit of authenticity there, although Tesco did have some hacks recently, and you can sort of see why there might have been some pressure on it. And 10 years as the CEO of anything is a pretty good tenure, and this is a bank now with 6 million customers.
What is that in those 10 years?
And 11 billion in deposits. Like, actually, you can be pretty proud of that, I think.
Indeed, 4,000 people employed by the company now, so it feels like pretty big move.
I'm still overexcited that they've now got contactless club cards at Tesco. I think that's like the biggest innovation I've seen in years. In loyalty, contactless loyalty. My brain's going to all sorts of exciting places.
The whole pay quick solution is actually really good. So I can see them actually moving that on, very well. So
do we know who's taking over?
Not yet. No, there's sort of talk of whether it's going to be an internal sort of move. There is a deputy CEO, or whether there's going to be sort of recruitment externally. So I guess there's nothing going to be announced until I think it's around February next year. So watch the space, I guess. But knowing Benny well, I'm sure he'll be moving on to something super interesting next.
Cool. All right. So next story up, Sarah. There's one here in TechCrunch. Curve, the kind of the app and prepaid card and company that allow you to kind of spend with one card and get the benefits from another card, now lets you go back in time and switch the card you paid with retroactively. So I bought something yesterday, but now I can change it from being my debit card to my credit card. Is that the deal here?
Yes, as far as I understand it, it's and somebody will probably be able to explain the technical details better than I can. But as far as I understand it, it's basically, even though the money goes out, is shown on your debit card or credit card on your personal account within a couple of days, it doesn't actually go anywhere for a couple of weeks. So the point is that on that platform, Curve still has time to move it between whichever card it's used. I don't know the specifics of how they do that. There's probably some schemes out there who are going, and issuers out there who are going, excuse me, you're doing what now? I also don't know how interchange fees and things are going to work if you're switching from one card to the other, which merchant processor has to deal with it. There's a lot of technical stuff that I won't even pretend to understand. But if you are Curve's ideal target customer, which is a small business, this is brilliant, because small businesses are renowned for having not enough money in the right places at the right time. So if you're suffering from a cash flow problem and you can go, oh wait, let me move that from here to here, then you're a lot more flexible. I mean, I believe it's targeted at small businesses, independent travellers, that kind of people. Because I tried to get one and they were like, you're not independent.
That would be the biggest pain point for a small business. So my show on Sky News interviews small businesses and it's cash flow at the right moment, at the right time, exactly as you're saying. So they can take the pain out of that. There's
if you've got an extra 2 weeks, I mean, in small business, 2 weeks is a long time. Like if you're waiting for to get paid or whatever. So I understand the logic of it. I don't know how long they're going to get away with it.
Because this is money out of the pockets of the issuer, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm sort of a credit card issuer and you are moving the payments to me, fantastic. But if I'm the bank that's issued you your debit card and you're switching the payments away, but you've incurred an expense to me, like you've used my rails to make the transaction, and for me to say yes, you're good for that transaction, but somebody else is, like, I can see why people would be annoyed at this, and Curve have so far managed to get away with this, but I wonder if the schemes will, or banks will come in and start saying, hang on, that's not right.
To be fair, this one never has a headline first half been so exciting and been let down so dramatically by the second half.
Time travel?
Yeah, as a Back to the Future fan, I was all in for this one, and this may be finally the thing to get people into.
Yeah, I should have opened that up with Great Scott. Curve lets you go back.
Indeed, but this for me though actually fixes quite a major flaw with this type of aggregation card system. To be honest with you, because actually, if I have a single card that rules them all, yay. But if I have to dick around with an app to figure out which one I'm actually going to be putting it to at the point where I'm actually making a transaction, then that's a pretty major UX problem. So I don't care what it goes on, I'm just carrying one card and I just figure out all that stuff later on.
But then you have to spend extra time doing admin, which small businesses say is one of their biggest pain points anyway.
You could just set up rules, I think. And so there's something about
You set a default.
Okay.
You always set a default from a Curve perspective. There's a default card that it goes from. I actually think the Curve proposition has been advanced dramatically. The last 6 months, they really sort of went out with a very clearly alpha product. The user interfaces, everything that's kind of come forward is really sort of moving it forward. So I think another functionality drop on this, and we're sort of moving towards where they probably wanted to be to start with.
And I wonder if we'll see this popping up more and more around the world. It's been very sort of European, I think, in its initial phases. But anyway, on that note, we need to hear from our sponsors.
And get more beer.
And get more beer. Cool. Anybody still watching on the live feed, or we killed it?
No, we got like 6 people.
Right.
We're moving really quickly today.
Yeah, no, this is pretty good. That was like half an hour.
I had a lot of sugar today.
We're glossing over the stories a bit, but actually...
Very
Cool, we are back. Thank you very much to our sponsors. And we're cracking back on with the news. David, there's a story here that came from, I don't know where it came from.
FinExtra, this one.
FinExtra, you see, thank you. That's what my co-host so on the ball. It's about Poland's mBank, and they are licensing a tech platform to third-party financial institutions. That's an interesting.
Yeah, so mBank have really sort of been put up as the poster boy for transformation for quite a while now. Being able to make all of those changes, win all of the awards. They've kind of won Finovate, I think 4 or 5 times now in various different geographies with various different bits of functionality that they're taking to market. So really sort of packaging up what they did and how they did it and taking that to market is kind of like the holy grail for banks, really. So this idea of M-Box banking model being bought by La Banque Postal. I'm not sure why that was a Spanish accent for a French bank, I'm going to be honest with you, but let's just go with that. But actually, the idea that mBank are doing this makes complete sense. I'm not entirely sure, though, given, I guess, the story of mBank, given that they didn't fundamentally change all of their technology. So they're still running on a core banking engine that isn't sold anymore by Essentia, the Alnova platform. But actually sort of, abstracted all of the data, abstracted all of the services and started to make compelling things, kind of workarounds to fixing all of the technology.
But I guess this workaround model is one that is gaining popularity, and it's not wrong, it's just probably not as good as doing it properly.
Yeah.
And by properly, I mean starting again in greenfield, because you will get a lot of opportunities. But that said, mBank has won a lot of awards because they did extremely well with an old platform. And I guess there are a lot of banks in the same situation that have been trying to digitally transform, been trying to deliver new services, and their existing systems and their existing spaghetti's been holding them back. So for somebody to say, hey, we did it, and we did it without replacing the core, and here's the answer in a box, it's going to be very compelling.
It's interesting because this was actually announced about 18 months ago that mBank was partnering with Essentia to take it to market. So I wonder if actually this is just the first of the things coming through the sales cycle with this French bank to actually say, they've proven the market, somebody's going to buy it.
There's a lot of companies in this category as well already. There's eBankit, there's Backbase, there's Soft Intelligence. There's people been out there doing this kind of stuff. But I think the fact that this is born out of having been implemented in a place, it gives it a good story.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think there's beyond that. There's this particular article mentions Fidor. There are plenty of what you want to call them, neobanks or whatever, that are selling their own, white labeling their software, selling it, whatever you want to call it. Mostly coming out of Germany, actually. Now I think about it. But I guess maybe exactly as Simon says, the fact that they've done it themselves, they've got a brand behind them, and they have
Credibility.
The credibility is exactly it. Maybe that's going to put them ahead in this game. I'm not sure how it's going to go.
I think mBank generally, I think mBank have done amazing things, and when they sort of had Mick Arpanovic at the helm, I think those guys were sort of very much sort of leading the technological revolution, but actually sort of the cultural one as well. The story of how they did this is actually as compelling as what they did. But I haven't seen the sort of level of intensity out of the functionality recently. But maybe this is a sidestep into becoming a B2B software capability as well as actually being a banking organisation. There's almost, we did it so well that somebody else will buy this. That pretty much is how Amazon and AWS started, right?
Well, any extra revenue stream for any mainstream bank is going to be good, right?
Sounds good. Yeah, no CEO is going to say no, right?
Indeed, and maybe they spin it out one day. I mean, a lot of the core banking vendors started as a bank's platform that got spun out. So there's definitely something here, but this isn't the core. This is the stuff you put around the core to make it better in one box. But I think for the larger organizations, they're still going to be stuck in that digital transformation, trying to take it's the smaller banks that only have 15 systems to worry about can do this quite easily, can take those 15 systems, wrap them up and do something nice and digital with an older core. If you're a bigger bank with 4,000, 7,000 systems, it's a lot harder to do that, and actually you're probably better off starting with a greenfield stack and a specific proposition, which we've seen a number of organizations start to do, and actually there you can execute, you can get something to market, and you can act and behave like a fintech. And this is the old GE model that we talk about a lot, where you kind of got the legacy business and the new business that you grow, and over time it sort of does this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always going to be that. In fact, is one of the key problems with core replacements is how do you do this? Like, because at some point you end up with this, and then you've got to do that. And if this
Which
makes
makes total sense for the people on the live stream.
Oh,
but
I
for the
just realised what I've done. My point is that you've got to run things in parallel. You've got to run things in parallel, and you've got to ramp one up and turn one down.
Yes.
And I will no longer do hand gestures.
No, that was my fault. I led you into that. I realised it was entirely me, and then I managed to blame you for it somehow.
I think interesting that Accenture's involved as well, and they're doing a lot of these kind of partnerships at the moment. I spoke with Frank Rowe, the CEO of Nomus, recently. Interviewed him for a TV show, and they've just partnered with them as well. So these kind of huge brands with the great credibility, like we were saying, will take this to the next level, I would have thought.
It's an interesting one. Like I guess the for the banks and actually for people like Accenture, Accenture are looking at new revenue opportunities to monetize very, very senior relationships in all of these organizations. So this makes sense for them
really
all the way through.
Pouring big investment.
Yeah.
But they're creating new role for themselves. All of these consultancies, they're facilitators now. They're like, you want fintechs? We got fintechs. You want banks? We got banks. And it kind of
like a matchmaking.
It's always been a traditional role, but they're kind of like branching it out and calling it a fintech hub or accelerator.
I think when Oliver Wyman and Santander did the FinTech 2.0 white paper a couple of years ago, they nailed it. FinTech 1.0 was competition, and now it's all about collaboration. Temenos have their open marketplace. Accenture has the FinTech lab. Now everybody has a lab, and getting the connections between those two really figured out is definitely something that's a big focus for large organizations.
That's so valuable to be the person to be connecting those kinds of people together.
Yeah, I'm still nervous about the whole collaboration thing. Like, I think most of the sort of dialogue around that's being mandated by the banks, where they can dampen down some of the fear to a certain degree. I know we've talked before about the story about Amazon being the just the distribution partner online for Barnes and Noble, and that sort of went rather badly in terms of the approach that those things could actually happen. So I see it only takes one of these people that actually partners with a bank to create digital products that then becomes the HSBC at some point down the line. So I think most of the the emphasis on that is by bankers rather than the B2C players within fintech. The B2B players in fintech, absolutely, because actually you're not threatening the banks, you're threatening the likes of Accenture. And again, from Accenture's perspective, this becomes a defensive play because you can defend yourselves from that attack by B2B fintech players by actually partnering up with them before they're too big, because then you've got the, hey mate, I can get you to talk to the CEO.
And I commend this sort of work. I think it's really positive. The thing I do worry a little bit about is supporting that with an older business model on the consulting side. Yeah. So I do worry about then targeting that on how many bodies and how much are they utilised. I think there's that I'm a little nervous about, but I do think that the overall drive is a positive one.
Great.
Cool, so I'm going to move on. There's a lovely story here in FinExtra about Danske Bank developing a pocket money app. And a conversation broke out in the office about this one a couple of days ago. I know, David, it's not something that you've had to worry about with your kids, but Tom, who was really thinking, who works for 11FS, this would be really, really cool. Basically, using the tool, kids can see when their pocket money is paid into their account, how their savings develop, and while parents can use the mobile banking app to transfer money and keep an eye on the child's spending, children can use a pocket money card to withdraw cash from an ATM and use it in stores. This is kind of digitizing pocket money, and I'm surprised no bank's done this before, because you've got to think parents out there would love this.
I absolutely love this story. It really, it just touched me. I think it's great. I think it's brilliant. It's like financial education, learning from the age that you're getting pocket money, which is, we had a bit of a debate about this, and at what age do you get pocket money? I remember getting 50 cents Australian AUD when I was little, but
what did you have to do
hard for it. Well, my sisters and I, there's three of us, someone had to clean the bathroom, someone had to do the vacuum cleaning, and someone had to do the polishing. We lived in a big farmhouse, so it's quite big. And I think the bathroom was a short straw, to be honest. But I think this is brilliant. I think this is this education piece and learning from that early age, just like I think that financial education should definitely be in curriculum, and it isn't. It certainly wasn't when I was in school. Yeah, I love this story. I think it's fantastic, and this is something that is really taking it to the next level. I mean, Australian banks, I remember, CommBank having certain apps, and you've got your, what were the Dolomites? Commonwealth Bank Dolomites, and they had a really interesting, and now I look at it as an adult, but they all came into the schools and you got your Dolomite account, and it was like a really trendy thing, and now I realise actually that was just marketing. And I'm like 5, nobody knew that, and everyone has their Dolomite account, and that is why Commonwealth Bank in Australia is the leading brand. It is, because a lot of people don't change.
You get them in as kids, and sorry.
Yeah, that was exactly the point I was going to make.
So I mean, this isn't new concept. It's been around like 5 or 10 years, and there are Oscar and Go Henry and Rocket is another one that do this. But obviously there is a certain amount of brand awareness to be raised. And if you're already a big bank brand, it's easy to get people on board. But it's kind of like taking it. So when I was a student, we used to get. If you got an account with NatWest, you'd get a free rail card for 3 years whilst you're at uni. And it was exactly the same kind of idea. Get them on whilst they're kids, students.
And you're unlikely to change.
Yeah, and you just never change as you go on.
The second you get your first job, and that's where your salary goes, then you're in, right?
That's it.
Until your next life stage. But I love this, so that children can safely practice managing their finances with parents watching from the sidelines. It's a certain responsibility, and it's taking responsibility at an earlier age. I know it's controversial. I like the idea of the responsibility at an early age. I do wonder if we're only going to get the kind of parents using this that would have taught their kids about money anyway. The helicopter. Do you see what I mean? My family were very good at educating us about money, and this is how much money you have, and okay, you want extra money to go to that gig, well then you have to do something to earn it, and you've got to save it, and this is the kind of thing that I can see my family would have introduced us to, but I'm thinking that maybe the people who need the education the most is people out there who don't know what an interest rate is. But maybe parents who aren't as educated in finance, maybe this is a great tool for them to almost have as well as the kids. Like,
we've got to look at where it is as well, Denmark, where there is everybody's financially literate, and Danske Bank have a great history of introducing innovations and getting not just everyone in Denmark, but everybody in Scandinavia to use it. So.
No, Danske Bank and the Nordics generally are a hotbed of innovation for this kind of stuff. And what I love about this is it's a new proposition, and that customer acquisition point that you made makes complete sense, which is why it surprises me we haven't seen more of this from major banks before. Because to that point, you acquire somebody young and you're unlikely to lose them throughout the rest of their career.
Yeah, that was definitely my case. It was like a clipboard from Midland Bank with a lovely griffin on it, actually coming to my school and giving it to me. And then I was a HSBC customer for forever. But I could definitely see me using this with my kids as they they get older. It's a great way of kind of increasing the controls from a parental perspective, but actually empowering the child as well. You don't have to keep coming back and asking for stuff. It actually gives them a real sense of responsibility. And if the well's dry,
that's it.
No more fidget spinners, right? You're done. Right?
Well, this is where FinTech I think really comes in. And the last few years it's obviously hugely prevalent. It's why we're doing this show. So you say, Simon, it's interesting we haven't seen it before, but maybe this is the moment in time where you will start to see things like this. It's an app. Right.
Yeah. So we've actually seen pretty major patents launched by Apple in this space. So these guys have kind of registered through the ability to control parental accounts through iTunes being put into prepaid cards. So those guys have kind of, and this is not a new thing. They did it back in, I think it was 2013, 2014. So the sort of thinking behind this and the ability for a parent to have not only sort of access to the tap, but actually even down to the merchants and the locations and even the times that you can actually access that money. I think all of these controls are, almost the things that when you've got a real-time data source and you've got actually sort of real-time access to banking, you can actually do all of this stuff. So really it's, whether it be a kind of an 8-year-old I'm trying to give some cash to, or whether it's an employee within a banking organisation, equally these things kind of apply to the SME market. So,
well, I was just about to say, and I can't remember the name. Oh, Soldo, that was it. They started out with a family account, which is very similar to this. So I'm the head of the family, and you'll have cards that run off the account, and you're 8 years old. So one person's 8 years old, so you can only shop in like Boots and Tesco, and you can spend £10 at a time. But you are the second adult in the house, second person, so they have different limits in different shops. And that's how they started, and it kind of turned out to not work great for them, so they have done exactly what David suggested and pivoted to a business model. So now I'm the CEO, and it's exactly the same. You're my my CFO, so you get access to everything, but you
It's
know,
like corporate cards.
yeah, but you're
corporate
person 2 and you only get expenses for like a client entertainment, and you're person 3 and you only get expenses for
And
kind of
people have
like.
been pushing those virtual cards for some time, but I think the there's bankable and there's a whole bunch of, I mean, MasterCard have in control. That's been around for about 10 years or so. But what's interesting is that whilst the proposition has existed, I love that a major bank has launched it. And to me, that's the key here, is that major bank has launched it, and let's watch the take-up of this one, because I think a lot of us have been crowing about how useful this will be. And if it does come on and people do start to use it, then hey, we're right, and if they don't, then maybe not.
So is that the second time in this podcast I had a good idea that somebody else has already done, basically? Is that,
Nothing new under the sun. You have lots of great ideas.
You're going to go for the hat trick, then? We've got some more stories.
You've got to do it. You've got to do it. Sarah, there's a story here in the New York Times. Women in tech speak frankly on the culture of harassment.
So this kind of, I mean, I don't know if deliberately this story specifically does follow on to the stories that came out of Uber a few weeks ago, which we talked about on this podcast.
Basically, Miami,
I mean, basically, the story is kind of what most women in tech already know, but isn't out there as obviously as it should be. That being a woman in Silicon Valley is really, really hard, like really hard, and this particular article is all about these stories. These women are basically giving anecdotes of things that have actually happened to them, and they are horrific. What's really sad is that most women listening to this who work in tech will not find them that horrific. They'll find them something that's happened to them or their mate. You know, we talked about it before. I was on this show with Liz, and she explained an anecdote of hers, and I was like, wow, that's awful, but actually it's not that awful. I've heard other people suffering similar things. I mean, long story short, it's great women are actually finding the courage to speak up. As far as I can see, we need people to speak up. What's sad is that at the bottom of this article it says X number of women were too afraid to put their name to their stories. They wouldn't put their names on them, and I can see why they wouldn't. Or you know, X number of women didn't want to actually tell us their stories because they were too afraid of the retribution. So something horrible and in this country illegal is happening to them, and they're too scared to talk up. Now that's really, really worrying. And you know, what compounds it is it sounds like it's actually a cultural thing as well. Like it's actually part of the way these companies work.
Well, it seems, like I say, it seems very similar to the sort of Uber story, doesn't it? That actually there's a fundamental culture problem in a company that's only existed for, you know, a very, very short period of time. And that's terrible, isn't it? You know, and some of the stories that are coming out of this, that people are being sort of, you know, propositioned for sex by an investor, like, and that it would sway the ability to actually get investment by, you know, becoming a little bit more engaged with that particular individual. So it's, yeah, it feels bizarre. There's interesting sort of quotes in here from is it Chris Sacca? So actually sort of making a bit of an apology in this sense that actually I now understand, and I personally contributed to this problem and I'm sorry. So, you know, it feels like this is going to kind of run, and you know, similar to a bunch of you know, pretty horrific things that have been coming out of you know, what's been happening in the 80s and 90s with BBC presenters in the UK. Then it kind of feels like one of these things that you know, the sort of you know, the scandal on this one is only probably just being sort of removed, and actually it will give a lot of people the ability to actually start coming forward a little bit more forcibly.
I think it's giving it a voice, sorry, Sarah. I think it's giving it a voice, and I think, I mean, I feel really passionately about this. I work in television and in finance, and, you know, trust me, I think I probably don't need to say much more there, but I think a really good point you make, Sarah, is that, you know, people are speaking about it now. Not great that you can't put your name to it yet, but, you know, that is what it is. But people are speaking about it. It's so important to get it out there. We're talking about it on a global podcast. Again, gets it out there further.
I mean, the thing is as well that you know, last time we talked about this on the show, there were men in the room who were like, that's not a real thing. That's never actually happened. Who just didn't know that it happened. And they just had no idea of it. Now, that's not their fault if they aren't seeing it or aren't hearing it. So, you know, as you
but
say,
then if they see it and hear it and then they listen to it, and perhaps, you know, anyone listening or, you know, wherever this story goes out, surely people will hear it. And, you know, people have a conscience. Most people have a conscience, right? Unless you're a sociopath. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, something I've done has been inappropriate. And, you know, that's the story. I guess I like that someone apologised. Fair enough, put their hand up and apologise.
There was another one of an incubator / accelerator that shall remain nameless, but actually they did a good thing. Basically, they said if they heard any story of harassment against an investor in an early stage company, that investor was put on a list, and they were then not given the opportunity to invest again in that company. They were literally blacklisted off their list. And I was like, but that's maybe talking up is one thing, but then we also need some action.
I'll just say it. I had a really inappropriate occasion a couple of months ago, and my CEO Charles Green went back to my office, told him what happened, and we just straight out blacklisted this individual from having anything to do with the business. There was just no comment, no questions asked, and I think it is having those. They say like male champions of change and whatever, and I think you need them both on both sides. There's unconscious bias there, but you definitely need people who are just willing to sort of back you and stand up against it, and just to feel that you can say it, working in an environment where you feel that you can say something has happened. I was shocked. I cried about it because I thought, what have I done to make someone think that that's appropriate? And then, I really thought about it. Really, it's really upsetting. It's horrible, actually, but thought about it, and then when actually it wasn't me, and that was just sort of a victimless thing. And then I was thinking, what if that was someone so much younger than me that thought, oh, I have to do that to get ahead, which that's what kind of really pissed me off, to be honest, because I can kind of walk away.
The great thing about shattering unconscious bias is you have to speak up in order to be able to do that, and I think you give people the opportunity to shatter their own unconscious bias when you do that, and I commend the people who've spoken up here. I really do, and there's an interesting stat here that because most venture capitalists and entrepreneurs are men, there's data from PitchBook that says female entrepreneurs received 1.5 billion in funding last year versus the 58.2 billion for men. And this, I want to link this to a thing that a study Barclays did a couple of years ago, where they identified that higher representation of women on boards and senior executive level outperformed in terms of share price and in terms of revenues. So that it's just bad business to not be good at diversity. Like, it's factually incorrect to do that. It just makes no sense.
There was I don't know if you were going to point to the Harvard Business Review study from last week or 2 weeks ago, which was exactly the same about VCs and about the question female founders get asked different questions to male founders by VCs. So it's not even as if you're a VC and you must get, 1,500 pitches through your door every day. It's not like you have I would have thought, maybe this is, but I would have thought you have a list of standard questions. You want to know this, 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 and this, and then if they're interesting, you'll take them on to the next stage. Yeah. But it turns out if the person or the name on the application is female, they ask a different set of questions.
Well, it almost needs to go back to that blank CV where you take the name off, right? So you don't know about gender, race, sort of sexuality. Interestingly, in Australia, there's a woman, Jo Burston, who I'm quite close with, who has a program, Inspiring Rare Birds, and she has this huge progress with government to get female entrepreneurs, out in society. It's a mentorship program, and I think people like that giving a voice to, there needs to be more female entrepreneurs, just so there's diversity, really. And obviously there's different types of businesses, and, if you get down to kind of the nitty-gritty of the money side of things, like obviously from a monetary side of things, the world is made up of a whole bunch of people who will, buy into different products.
Yeah, I think it's sad that we have to point out that financially it makes sense to do it. It's just like common fucking sense.
You don't admit that, but if you have to, I think it may have been Gaylor who made the point, just to name check her again. He said, somebody came out and said you must sign this, basically diversity charter. I don't know what it's called. Promise that you're going to treat women well. And she came out and said, no, just treat people like humans. Treat every person like a human, and then you won't have a problem. So.
You have to almost balance that, because I have a lot of conversations I write a Women in Leadership series, and it's kind of that balancing act of going, you're just an awesome person, you're so credible, you know exactly what you're doing. Do we need to make a point of it that you're a woman? So I can see that side of things. And then I still have kind of confusion about this in my own mind, but I do think it's important. And you still have to do it. I do think it's important for women to sort of step up, to appear on podcasts like this, and just push yourself out there, just so that it is more diverse.
I think the sort of continual worry that I have on this stuff is that when it was just like an old chap, a kind of an old chap who I'm like, dude, you just don't sort of live in this generation.
I tried to bring Prince Philip into this last time and it ended badly, but that's the perfect example in the UK.
And it was sort of like I don't in any way condone it, but I just get you don't live in this world anymore, and you need to just go away.
Yeah. It's like talking to your grandparents about certain social issues, and you just think, oh,
not anymore. But it's not, right? It's not, and it's actually like things like the Uber examples, where actually it's like 21 to 30-year-olds predominantly who are sort of creating this environment.
What's
where
their
actually-
leadership showing them then?
Well, so
I think that's
just
it, yeah.
just the one that just before we move on from this, and although we've been covering it for a while, but we had one story this week on Business Insider, which was somebody giving an explanation of this, that it's becoming younger guys again, and they said basically what happens is a lot of the big tech companies will go into universities and they will take guys who are really good at programming or computer development or whatever, and they'll bring them on board and they'll give them a signing bonus of $100,000, and they will be all that. And these are guys who typically at university or at college have not done so well with women. And then they get brought on board to these companies, and all of a sudden they're getting loads of money. Their ego inflates.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was the point that was made in the article, was that's how it's happening, because you're taking these young men and you're making them think they're all that, and there are only like 3 women in the company anyway. So
well, there's
you
similar, similar sort of laterals into the sports industry. There's similar stuff that's been said. It's like reasonably poorly educated, very athletic young men given loads of money suddenly go weird, right?
Lots of money too young is never a good thing. I do have to move us on. This is an
sorry.
extremely important topic, but unfortunately we are up against it on time, and we've got 2 more to cover. The story here, David, from Business Insider, of course, about the fintech startup Tide receiving a $14 million boost from the Spotify backers, Creandum, I believe it's called.
Yeah, there's a few people in this one, to be honest with you. They've actually got, so Anthemis in here, Passion Capital, and a few others, who one of which was one of the backers of Spotify. But Tide raised $14 million, which is great, to be honest with you. Like, SME banking for us is kind of like one of the least tended to sort of industries, to be honest with you. Most of the time it's been a kind of almost a poorer version of what you get for retail, but for some reason you've got to pay for it, which is kind of weird.
especially when you look at the British statistics that say that most people who are small businesses end up with a personal account anyway, because getting a business account is far too hard and far too expensive, and that doesn't actually give them what they need.
Exactly.
Credit card.
Pretty much, yeah. So the idea that they've got 40 million to sort of build on what they've done and actually sort of really sort of create a platform that they can actually build things out on. It feels when I sort of saw the sort of Passion Capital investment on this one, and particularly in the early days of this one, it felt like it was sort of Monzo for business. And I don't think necessarily the first sort of couple of iterations of the functionality has really sort of lived up to that type of hype. But I think having raised 14 million, these guys have got a really good opportunity. And I know George has been on the show a couple of times before, but he's got pretty big aspirations for where this will go. So well done, you guys. Congratulations on the raise, and looking forward to seeing what you do with the money.
And I think this says that VCs in the mainstream, outside of the VCs that have just been investing in fintech, really spot that small business opportunity, because their portfolio companies are experiencing those business bank account problems on a regular basis, and also therefore that the diversity of investor is kind of increasing. So I know Creandum have done some other things in fintech before, but there is definitely something to them.
One of the interesting things that George actually says in this space is that, so unlike the other banking startups like Monzo, they have no intention of actually trying to get a full banking license. So, which is interesting. So George actually goes on to say, so having a full license would actually be bad for our members. Not having a full license, we can take risks with our members' money, which is an interesting statement to make from a marketing perspective. I think there's probably some nuances in actually what he probably meant by that, rather than what it sounds like. But it's an interesting one that he's kind of backing into a Barclays partnership for handling all of the transactions.
There are 2 schools of thoughts when you come to neobanking, right? We're going to build it from the ground up, it's all going to be ours, and we're going to try and avoid any kind of third-party supplier issues, which may or may not have happened today to an awful lot of British neobanks. The other argument is, is that, the reason you do it is to avoid that. So one side is to go, you build from the ground up, you have your own license, it's all your technology stack, and you go for it, but that's expensive and time-consuming and hard. Or you partner with somebody else who's already got the license, and you do the really good functionality on the front end. And certainly with small businesses, it's not just fintechs who are waking up. Actually, we're seeing some of the high street banks go, "Ooh, underserved market. Ooh, technology can help us serve them." So I think this market's going to be really interesting. Whether it's loans, whether it's banking, whether it's
a massively underserved
Yeah.
and dissatisfied market.
And globally as well.
Globally,
Yeah,
this is
This is not a UK thing. This
No,
is not a
huge.
London thing. I know we're a very sort of UK-centric podcast, or have been. But I think to your point, there's yeah, exactly. To your point, good idea. There's definitely a
We
demand
talk about
globally.
Australia a lot. You guys don't like Apple Pay, right?
We talked about the dollary-do. I remember that
We did, we
conversation.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The didgeridoo? No.
Speaking of fun stories, we've got one here from Medium about Bag Snatchers, Monzo, and a Night of Adventure.
Love this one.
This
too.
is a story by Tristan Watson, who's the CEO of Ignite Accel, who support early stage tech companies in the UK. And he goes on to tell a story about being at a pub, and he's with some friends, and lists all the things, all the gear that's in his bag. And then somebody at the table cracks a joke, everyone laughs, joining the conversation. Then he goes back to his chat and he checks on his bag, and then he goes, wait, it's gone. Where the fuck is my bag? And we've all had that feeling, and then usually you find your bag or your phone and everything's okay.
Did you see the picture of the guy's bag though? What he actually had in it was like, no wonder he freaked out. He had like an SLR in there and like 1,000 phones and a
A
laptop
MacBook and
like,
Pro,
no
like
wonder
a
he
GoPro.
freaked out. You know?
Yeah, no, you would freak out.
This is so well written. Everyone just needs to read this story. I think.
It really
Look it up.
does. Yeah. Bag Snatchers, Monzo, and a Night of Adventure in London. Definitely look it up. Because he has a great narrative throughout it. And basically, the upshot of this is he tried Find My iPhone, but his phone was offline. The thieves had thought of that. He tried a whole bunch of stuff, but then somebody was silly enough to spend using the Monzo card. And of course, because Monzo tells you exactly where a transaction happened and exactly when it happened, they were able to trace him. And I believe it all ended quite well.
So the one this is brilliantly written, and it's a fantastic narrative. The one thing that terrifies me slightly is that he went after the guy who took his bag.
Agreed.
And I read an article fairly similar to this in a mainstream newspaper last weekend, and they were basically like, the police were basically like, please don't do that.
Don't ever do
Please
that.
don't follow the people who stole your bag.
I was worried for him when I was reading this. It was like, then I was approaching 3 youths. And
In
it was
the
like,
dark.
oh,
Well, he wrote
okay.
the story, so he lived to tell
Exactly,
the tale.
that's
obviously.
very true.
But I mean, yeah, I think we all probably thought of that. So amazing that, and all it comes down to is the sort of customer-centric nature of what Monzo do, and they cared about him, and he.
And everybody talks about how Monzo is just a feature, or it's a prepaid card, and it's like, well, why would I do a prepaid card? And that's a sign to me that somebody hasn't got it.
Oh goodness, yeah. You see them everywhere. I was talking about this the other day. We see them on the bus in Croydon. Like, you see them in the supermarket in Cambridge. Like, you wouldn't see them everywhere if people didn't have a need to use them.
Whoever came up with the colour of that card was
Oh.
probably a smart chap, wasn't
Genius.
Hot coral.
Yeah.
It's bright, isn't it? It's really bright, and it's iconic. Like, you know what it
Yeah.
is when you see it. Even I know what it is when I see it. And when you see it.
It's an interesting one because I like the version of this story when a colleague of mine, when I was working at Lloyds Banking Group, had their laptop stolen. Ended with their laptop being stolen. Like, there was no blog, do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was just suddenly it was a security problem because a bank laptop had been stolen. But now there's like a whole thing with it. It's amazing.
Yeah, way to go, Tristan. So that wraps up another news show. But before we wrap up, where can we find out more about Chloe?
Oh, okay. You can find out more about me, www.rfigroup.com, which is where I'm the Global Media Director. Also have a Vimeo channel, Sky News Business RFI TV, which is where my show Business Success is, where I talk to entrepreneurs and business owners about what it takes to start an amazing company. It's pretty fun.
I'd most highly recommend following Chloe on Instagram, to be honest with you, because it's a mixture of behind the scenes stuff of Sky News and then just feeling sort of very envious about beaches in Sydney.
Yeah, I think it's beaches, babies, yoga, and behind the
Only
sort of
puppies,
screens
puppies and kittens.
puppies on Sky News. So that's Chloe Allison, 2 L's, James.
Cool. And Sarah, where can people find out more?
Oh, I'm nowhere near that exciting. I write for BI Intelligence, and I can be found on Twitter, which is I suppose everybody can these days, but well, except for Chloe. Sorry. So I'm at Sarah Kashansky on Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, to our listeners and to the people watching live, if you like what you've heard this week, please do subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on iTunes. That really helps, and it lets us know that you like what we're doing. Thank you very much for listening.
Yay.
You go, yay.
Turn it off so I can get really weird.
It's like the end of BBC
Yeah, yeah.
News where they're
I
like,
would love it if
"That's
it went
what
out
I
going,
use."
yay, turn it off so I can get really weird.
It just did.
That's